let's get into our legal news section. First thing we're talking about is what they call Pillow Talk insider trading. It was actually here in Houston. I'm based in Houston. Austin's based out of our Dallas office. But a husband and wife are living in Houston. Wife works for BP, British Petroleum, some type of executive job, I would suspect. She's working from home. The husband's working from home. The wife is privy to an acquisition that BP is going to do. BP is going to acquire Travel Centers of
Yeah.
America. And if you don't know what that is, I think they've got the TA signs and they're like truck stops or convenience stores all around the country. So, publicly traded company. The husband overhears the meeting or the conference. BP is going to acquire them. He's like, I've got a bright idea. I'm going to buy the stock, Travel Centers of America. He makes like $1.76 million. He gets caught and he goes to the wife and he goes, I did this because I loved you so much and I didn't want you to have to work so hard and I wanted you to be retired.
Yeah.
How do you think that went over, Austin?
Probably quite well. I mean, my significant other, whenever I tell her that I've committed insider trading based on information from her job, she's always quite happy with it.
BP declined to comment, and the wife, I think, immediately moved out, later divorced him. There's no evidence that the wife intentionally leaked any of this information. I don't think she is being prosecuted, but BP did place her on leave. I believe BP later fired her. So it did not end well for wife. She was not able to retire in the way that she wanted. And that move ended husband's marriage.
Just be careful where you're working. Make sure that you're on the same page with your partner about what's confidential, what's not.
And as lawyers, if your spouse doesn't work for the firm, anything we say, if you're having client conversations, is confidential. If you're an executive for a big company and you've got some deals being done out there and you need to keep that quiet, you need to make an effort to keep it quiet. Now, you don't expect your husband to eavesdrop and trade on it illegally. So the husband is not disputing the charges. I think he's trying to do a deal, probably punishable by some prison time up to 5 years and up to $250,000 in fines. He probably also has to give the money back. Moving along, let's get into transitioning rather awkwardly from insider trading to First Amendment rights. We have our home state of Texas, very conservative state, and the state of Florida. They're suing Meta and Google. Texas and the state of Florida is saying, you guys are different than a regular website. And because you are the town square, you are the modern day public forum, you should have different standards. So you don't get to moderate content. And I think what the conservatives are mad about is big tech is generally left leaning. They're generally Democrat, favorable to Democrats. The accusations from the conservative party is if they're posting things on social media, their content is being removed by big tech who doesn't like conservatives.
Absolutely.
But they're framing this in the context of big tech is their website's not a regular website. They're a public forum. They should not be entitled to the same free speech as an editorial newspaper. And the argument by big tech is we're not a public square.
It's just like a newspaper.
Yeah, right. They're an editorial newspaper, just like the Miami Herald or just like the Houston Chronicle, which is just a terrible newspaper, by the way. And they're entitled to the same First Amendment free speech rights as a newspaper. Now, the state of Texas and the state of Florida, their argument is, well, you're more like a telephone company. You're like Verizon Wireless, and your job is to provide telephone service or cell service and text messaging service. And anybody who texts or anybody who talks over your network, you're not allowed to regulate it, just like Verizon Wireless doesn't regulate text between private citizens. So they had 4 hours of oral arguments, and we don't have a decision yet. The court was very skeptical. Justice Samuel Alito said, well, I don't think you're like either one. I don't think you're like an editorial newspaper, and I don't think you're like a telephone company. How does the court decide? I don't know. You have any thoughts on the matter?
If I had to guess, they're probably going to come up with some weird factor test for this in-between situation, right? For free speech involving this in-between situation and content regulation there. So we'll probably get another like factors we have to walk through when we're considering if something can be regulated. And they'll be great for law professors.
And there's been much ado in oral arguments about the difference between services on the platforms. So we post things on social media all the time, but there's also different services. There's DM, direct messaging. There's communications between private citizens that are outside of the public posting. And the court is wrestling, well, how do we write a rule that maybe applies to both of those services?
Yeah,
I mean, there's one example that was thrown around oral arguments is like, well, maybe they're like Amtrak. Amtrak is a public carrier. So they carry people publicly on trains up and down the railroads on the East Coast or wherever their trains run. So they can't discriminate.
Sure.
They're a public carrier. But, Amtrak could also publish a magazine in their train that people could look, in which case they would have both First Amendment rights for their publication, but also be limited in their inability to discriminate. So we'll see how that one comes out. We'll keep you updated on that case. But that's a big, important case that's, I don't think, is getting enough press.